So now let's thinly slice our onions. Okay, now excuse me while I go cry. Today I'm making a creamy ricotta fettuccine tossed with caramelized onions and beet greens. I'm gonna sprinkle on some roasted pine nuts. Those are optional, but the beet greens and the caramelized onions, they're not. This is delicious and super easy, and just pick your favorite vegan cheese and put it in there. As you'll see in the recipe, it doesn't have to be ricotta. You can use any favorite vegan cheese, but it's better to be a little bit of a soft one. I even shredded some Parmesan because I had it. All right, let's get started. The first thing we're gonna do is roast our pine nuts. So I'm gonna stick the pine nuts on a tray and just put them in the broiler. Always the hardest thing is don't forget they're in there. You gotta remember that. Okay, now we're just gonna stick the onions in the pan. Caramelization takes a while. You have to be patient. I don't like to use olive oil, although there is gonna be oil in this recipe only because I'm using cheese. But other than that, I'm not adding any oil. So let's just put these onions in the pan. When you're wanting to caramelize them, you need to break the onions down until you get the liquid out of them, and that is best done with the lid on. Okay, and while we're waiting for both of those things, let's press our garlic. You can finely chop your garlic if you like. I just think pressing it is so much easier. Put as much in as you like. We won't be adding that until these are almost done. Okay, pine nuts should be done. Let's go get them. Let's see how the onions are doing. See, they're bringing their own liquid, so we don't even need to add any veggie broth yet. Not until we start getting some burn bits on the bottom. Keep going. Caramelizing your onions takes time, but it's so worth it. And in this recipe, that's probably the longest part of making it. It's so worth it though, you guys, because the rest of it's just cooking your pasta and throwing all this stuff together. Super easy. You gotta try this because the greens hidden in the pasta and the sauce make it so delicious. Most people don't eat enough greens, so I'm always looking for ways to sneak them in a recipe and make them delicious. And if I had kale, I often use kale because I don't get lucky enough to always have beet greens. But today I have beet greens and that's all I have. But if you have more, put more. There's no real amount that you have to put in. Just put greens in. Okay, let's check it out. See all that liquid now that it's making in there? So I think the onions are about halfway through. I think it's a good time to start boiling the water and begin to cook our pasta. I'm not using homemade. I hope to do a recipe with that soon. I'm just using store-bought, so it takes about 10 or 12 minutes. So I'm gonna get that water boiling on the stove while these are cooking. I just added a little salt to the water, and when it's boiling, I'll drop these in. Now we're talking. And we've got some nice browned bits on the side. So I'm gonna add just a splash of veggie broth because that's all the sugar in the onions and it's gonna help caramelize them even better. So let's season them with salt and pepper. And I want to add the garlic. So at this point you can see we pretty much don't need the lid anymore. We just need to keep stirring it around and letting them getting a little bit more caramelized. Okay, at this point we are going to add the beet greens. If you don't have beet greens, you can use spinach. Kale is really good, just chop it up really finely. And the idea is just to get these tender. Look how beautiful that looks. I'd say somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes, depending on which green you're using. If you haven't tried beet greens, please do. They're really my favorite green. Now I'm going to turn this off. And we're just going to wait for the pasta to be done, but the timing's almost perfect because these are done. And all we have left to do now is sprinkle in our cheese. I'm using fromage ricotta, my favorite. So we're just going to add this to the bowl of the pasta once we drain it. And we're going to add our pine nuts on the top, and I'm going to use some of my farmer's market tomatoes, these beautiful little Japanese cherry tomatoes, and just put them on as a garnish. Okay, pasta's done. So now I'm going to strain the pasta and then put it right back in the bowl. And I always like to use a little bit of the water left over from the pasta, so I quickly put it on top of the bowl so that whatever's dripping out, there'll be some liquid left. You see how the liquid's coming out? I want that. Okay, so now I'm just gonna dump this into the bowl. So you can see it's not soupy, there's just a little liquid left in there. Okay, so let's add our ricotta because we want that to melt. So we're just going to add about 3/4 of it and get that to melt in there. And if it doesn't melt, it's good in chunks. That's why I'm saving some for the end, because I want to make sure that there's some good chunks. And I'm going to put it in this bowl so you guys can see. See how delicious and creamy that looks? And it's a good time to add most of our Parmesan, but not all. You always want some for the top. Okay, at this point, I'm going to add my caramelized onions. I'm going to add a little more pepper. And I'm going to stir in some pine nuts, maybe half of them, and more of the ricotta cheese. That's lovely. Can you see how nice that's looking with the little chunks of cheese? But that's why I'm saving a little cheese back, because at the last minute I'm just going to put it on when I serve it with a little bit of Parmesan and some tomatoes and pine nuts. But I think the pine nuts, I really only need a few on top. Okay, so let me serve this up and then I'll do the taste test. But that's good. There it is, look at that. I put a few basil leaves from the garden. It's hard to imagine an Italian dish without basil, so at least I have it out. But it's not even needed. This is so delicious. Wow. First thing you taste is the sweetness of the onions. Amazing. And honestly, I would use 3 large onions. You think that's going to be a lot, but it's not. And with every bite, look, you're getting all that onion and the greens. I've got a couple pine nuts in there, and I see a chunk of cheese. That is so good. The onions have such a depth and also a sweetness, and the greens, of course, are always a little bit bitter, right? And then you taste the cheesy, creamy tone underneath. That is delicious, really. That is delicious. Fantastic. What a combo. Man, Lloyd's gonna be happy for dinner tonight, but you guys gotta try this. It's creamy, it's greens that are filled with nutrition, and it's beautiful pasta. And if you're gluten-free, just use gluten-free pasta. But make this recipe, it's fantastic. And other than caramelizing the onions, it's fast. All right, you guys, thanks for subscribing and watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.